welcome back to the Lit Cave. This is Brian, and I'm here today to talk about what I read in the second week of February. So this video is a day or so late, but it's still here relatively close to on time, so I feel alright about it. And let's jump in and talk about it. The very first thing I read this last week is I read the book Scary Close by Donald Miller. So the full title is Scary Close, Dropping the Act and Acquiring a Taste for True Intimacy. Now, anyone who knows me knows that I love Donald Miller. I love his writing so much. He is probably one of my all-time favorite writers. Three of his books have had a significant impact on me, and there's another two or three that I really, really love. And he hasn't written a whole lot more than that. So I love Donald Miller. This book it has become one of my new favorites. It's up in my top books. It deals a lot with just the idea of, it deals a lot with the idea of identity, like figuring out who we really are without putting on a show for everyone around us, but who are we at the core of us? And it deals a lot with relationships, like how do we, when we figure out who we are, allow that to inform our relationships? And how do we share who we really are with other people? And there were a lot of parts in this book. First of all, if you don't know, this is a non-fiction book. It may seem pretty obvious just by the description so far. But this book, there were a lot of points in the book where I really felt like, man, this guy's been reading my journals, except I don't actually journal, so that can't be true. But I felt like he was just kind of speaking as me, and I was deeply challenged by a lot of what he had to say. I cannot recommend this book enough if you're somebody that wrestles with knowing who you are, or wrestles with relationships, which I feel like those two things are things that just about everyone really wrestles with. I can't recommend the book enough, and I really, really encourage you all to pick it up, check it out, and see how you like it. It's number 5 on the New York Times bestseller list this week, and it's only a week old, so it's doing well, and I'm super excited that I was able to read it. I picked it up on, I think, the 10th or something, and I finished it on the 11th, so I read it pretty quick, but it was amazing. The next book I read, and I wasn't sure when this was going to actually come in, but I finally got it in. I'm super excited, and that is Fairest by Marissa Meyer, or Mayer. I really need to see how she pronounces her own last name. But I really, really liked this book as well. There's been some debate as to, first of all, this book's part of the Lunar Chronicles series, which consists so far of Cinder, Scarlet, and Cress. But there's been some debate about whether this book was a prequel or if it was a bridging book between Cress and the book that's coming out in November, which is Winter. And after reading it, I can say for sure this is something that's designed to, it's a prequel, but like a lot of prequels, you really don't want to read it before you read the series, because there's some stuff in it that kind of spoils the other books in the series. So I would recommend that you kind of hold off. But this book follows Queen Lavanna and tells us her story, which Queen Lavanna is the antagonist in the Lunar Chronicles series. She's kind of designed off of the Wicked Witch and Snow White. And so it follows her story. And in some ways it kind of reminds me of Gregory Maguire's book Wicked, in that, we have this character that we're all familiar with as an antagonist, an evil, kind of vile creature. But there's a story behind that creature as well. Like, how did they get to where they're at? What led them to become the wicked person that we know them to be? And in Gregory Maguire's Wicked, that's focusing on the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz, who they name Elphaba in his book, or Elphaba. But in this series, it's Queen Lavanna, who's the queen from Snow White, the wicked queen from Snow White. And it was fantastic. It's a short book. It's 222 pages, and then in the back of the book, there's 3 chapters from Winter. I purposefully did not read those 3 chapters because I feel like that would only make the wait till November that much worse for me. So I've only read the part that's from Ferris, but it was really well written, really interesting, and I felt it created a lot of development for Luna, which is the sort of moon colony there. So highly recommend that. Gave that 5 stars as well. After that, I've kind of read quite a few graphic novels. I've got 3 graphic novels that I read. I picked up Avengers Disassembled, which when I decided to get back into Marvel Comics a few years back, I was picking up graphic novels, which, if you're not familiar, graphic novels are usually a collection of individual comic books, usually 6 to 7 comics in a graphic novel. Sometimes if it's a crossover, it might have more than that. But for superhero comic graphic novels, that tends to be the case. So when I started back with graphic novels a while back, I started with Avengers Disassembled, which is a really kind of dark story, and it's basically like the destruction and the demise of the Avengers. Like, they basically break up, and everything that could possibly go bad goes bad in this graphic novel. It is a tough read in some ways because of that. It's not a very positive book, but it is so well written, and it makes it to where every single one of the characters in the story, it's believable that they would have these emotions, that they would express the emotions in the way that they do. So really well written, and it kind of, I don't know if it's the beginning, but for me it was the beginning of the Brian Michael Bendis run of Avengers, and from there it kind of ends up splitting into New Avengers and Mighty Avengers a little bit later. And so I highly recommend, if you're going to pick up back with Avengers Disassembled and go from there. Incidentally, David Finch does the art on it, and it's phenomenal. Okay, the next thing I finished was, I've been reading very slowly, just issue by issue, Black Widow Volume 1, which is called The Finely Woven Thread, and that's written by Nathan Edmondson. And first of all, I have to tell you that the art on this series by Phil Noto is so remarkable. It's such good art, very unique. The coloring is gorgeous. It's just so well done. But Black Widow is a character from the Avengers that I don't know a ton about. I love the way that Scarlett Johansson portrays her in the movies, but I really wanted to know more about her as a character. So I was excited to read this series, and it's really well written. You cannot walk away from it without knowing that the Black Widow is one tough lady. Incredibly skilled and dangerous and remarkable and interesting, and yet still there's this moral there's this morality that's underpinning who she is, which is something you would not necessarily expect from a spy. But I loved it. I can't wait to keep reading it. I also gave that 5 stars. And the last thing I read this week, so I read 5 things, was the New Avengers Volume 12, which is called Power Loss. And this was a reread for me, just like Avengers Disassembled was. And this is also Brian Michael Bendis. And this is a very unique story as well. It's got one of the funniest lines ever. Spider-Man has a fantastic line in this, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, but when you read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. Let's just say Luke Cage does not appreciate the line. But the New Avengers is a really great group when Brian Michael Bendis is writing it. It's led by Luke Cage, but we've also got Hawkeye, who at this time is going by the name Ronin. There's Spider-Man. There's Mockingbird. Just a lot of really interesting characters kind of fighting together. And part of the storyline here is that there's a tool used that causes them to lose their powers. So kind of how they respond to that. Really great book, really well written. I gave it 4 stars. Not quite as good as the other 2, but I really, really enjoyed it. So that's what I read this last week. Now, here's what I plan to read in the following week. I'm still reading A Tale of Two Cities. I'm about 30 pages from finishing, and I have to finish that by this upcoming Friday because I am trying to be done when my students are required to be done. So I think I'll probably finish that either tonight or tomorrow anyway. But gosh, I forgot. When you get to book 3 of A Tale of Two Cities, it's so good, so compelling, and so interesting, and you just want to keep going and going and going. So I'm really excited to finish that up. I'm also reading a book called Overwhelmed by Perry Noble, which is basically the subtitle there is Winning the Fight Against Worry. And I'm about 15% done with this book so far. I love Perry Noble. He's the pastor of New Spring Church in Anderson, South Carolina. And he has a really irreverent way of sharing something that requires tons of reverence, which is our faith in God. But I love the way that he says things, and so far Overwhelmed has been very good. I'm not far enough to give a whole lot of information, but you can probably expect that to come in a couple of weeks or so. I'm reading it a little slower in the mornings. And I also I've started Beautiful Chaos by Cami Garcia and Margaret Stoll, which is the 3rd book in the Castor Chronicles. I have not made it very far at all because I kind of got off track when I got totally absorbed in Scary Close. But I hope to pick that up and get a little further here this next week. I also will probably pick up the graphic novel Siege, which is another Marvel comic graphic novel. And it's another reread, and I'll probably reread that this week and talk about that on the next one as well. So that's what I've got planned to read. Tell me below if you've read some of the books that I read this last week, or if you've read anything that I'm planning on reading next week, and let me know what you think. Till the next time, see you same lit time, same lit channel.